welcome to parents and students and teachers and even school leaders, wherever you're joining us from. We are so happy that you've joined us this evening. Now, I'd like to move to introducing our panelists and letting them share a little bit with you about what brought them on this journey to serving students with learning differences and advocating for serving students with learning differences. So I will begin by introducing Dr. Amy Gilbert Richards, who is with us this evening. She is an affiliate professor and a chair of the philosophy department at Eastern University. She also teaches in Eastern's Templeton Honors College, and this Templeton Honors College is dedicated to great books and great questions. You can also check out their MIT program as well. She's a faculty fellow of the Templeton's Master of Arts in Classical Teaching program, and building on her previous work in philosophical and theological anthropology, she teaches a course in this program called, you'll love this, Difference and Human Dignity in the Great Tradition. This course is dedicated to both developing an understanding of what it is to be human through the lens of disability and difference, and offering practical techniques for classical classroom approaches for students with special needs. Also, Dr. Richards and Classical Academic Press have been collaborating on a book project that I mentioned, and this is related to her work in this course that she offers. So stay tuned for that, and you can pre-order it. She lives in Haverton, Pennsylvania with her husband and their 3 small girls. So before I talk any further, I want to say welcome, Dr. Richards. We're so glad to have you. And my first question to you as you greet these fine folk is, what made you personally interested in the subject of learning differences?
Thank you so much, Joylynn, and it's really a pleasure to be here with all of you. That's a great question to start with because it might not seem like the most natural fit to have a philosopher kind of joining in this conversation in this depth. My 2 roommates in college were special education majors, and they think it's hilarious that I'm now teaching this course and have been diving so deeply into these topics. And I really have to give the credit to the former dean of the Templeton Honors College, Jonathan Yonan, was forming the Master of Arts in Classical Teaching program back in around 2016 or so. And he said, I think you could do this course. I think your work could be deepened and broadened by looking at where your work in philosophical anthropology might connect to this question, because we want to extend the welcome of classical education to students with disabilities and learning differences. Being a youngish professor at that time, you say yes to your dean, right? And I did, and it's really I really think it's the grace of God leading me in that direction, because it has been the richest journey that I can imagine. I spent the next 2 years reading everything I could get my hands on, from philosophical and theological anthropology of disability, to special education textbooks, to memoirs of parents and people with disabilities. Really a kind of whole, eclectic mix of that in developing the course on difference in human dignity. And I find that wherever I go and I start speaking about these topics, people come out of the woodwork. They are so delighted, and I have learned so much by listening to these voices in a way that I fear I might not have if I hadn't started on this journey, and that would have been largely to my loss. My own children attend a local classical school, and so it really is a kind of personal investment as well, right? I want the education they receive to be an education that is open to everyone and creating communities of all of God's children. So that's just a little bit about where my journey started and where we are now.
Thank you so much. It's beautiful. And I know that we need those roots in anthropology to understand why we're applying what we're applying, and the basis and the justification for it and the motivation of it. So I appreciate that you are the philosophic and theological voice that will give kind of impetus to where we go. But as you said, even before we started this call, it's no good if we don't land it in practical application where people can actually find a real significance in the work that they do, and practical help. So, in light of that, I'm very happy to also introduce our other panelists who are special needs instructors with the Center for Students with Learning Differences. So, I'd like to next introduce Miss Angelique Chaverri, who holds a master's degree in special education from Missouri State University and a BA in psychology from Southwest Baptist University. Her master's thesis was on methods of teaching reading for students at risk for reading failure. Angelique has spent the last 20 years working to understand the underpinnings of learning. After initial interest in physical therapy and neuropsychology, she found her way into special education. And after leaving the public school system, Angelique went into private practice where she pioneered a method of blending standardized assessment to target areas of strength and need, then neurological therapies and academic instruction to help students succeed more quickly. She's provided training for parents, schools, and hospitals. One of Angelique's passions in life is to help prepare parents for teaching their children to learn. Angelique just celebrated 19 years of marriage to her beloved husband, Jeremy. She's a homeschooling mom to two wonderful young men, and she enjoys being at church and in her garden and traveling and family walks with the best dog in the world, Rowdy. So, Angelique, we're so happy to have you here tonight. And the question to you is, what made you interested in the topic of learning differences?
So I can't say for sure where this started for me, but I remember sitting. I had finished my bachelor's degree. I was planning to become a neuropsychologist. I was all set up to go into a program that rolled master's and doctorate all into one. And I went to see a friend, or well, my roommate said, "Hey, my uncle is a pediatric neuropsych. Would you like to go shadow him?" And I did. And he sat in an office all day and gave tests, and I wanted to do something to actually fix the problem. So I remember sitting in a foundations level class in my psychology degree, and a video was shown of a school in China where there were little ones who were born missing as much as half a hemisphere of their brain. And they were doing these really intensive therapies with these kiddos and having amazing results. And I bawled my eyes out and I went to my professor and I said, "I want to do that. How do I do that?" And no one knew what to tell me. But thankfully, God knew the direction. And so, little by little, little things being added, um, rabbit trails that turned into just what I needed to hear and what other people needed to hear kind of brought this whole thing full circle. So, yeah, just to see that God planted in my heart, I suppose. I just love these kiddos and their families.
Thank you so much, Angelique. And I can say, as someone who has personally witnessed the amazing work that Angelique has done with families, families contact me clamoring for more courses from her. I'm like, there's only one Angelique. I can't divide her up, but they have really experienced concrete benefit from work with her, both with her corporate courses at Scholé Academy, working with young students in like reading foundations and their parents, and then also working in the Center for Students with Learning Differences. So she's done really great work. And speaking of really great work, our final panelist, Heather McCoy, is doing really great work right now as she's at a conference right now and has been asked to be a speaker on learning differences and so forth. So welcome all of Heather's friends at the conference who are also joining us this evening. But I'll share a little of Heather's bio and then pitch it to you, Heather, to let us know more. So Heather McCoy holds a BA in liberal studies with an emphasis in art from California State University, Northridge, and a Master's of Education in Curriculum and Instruction with a dual emphasis in online teaching and learning and biblical literacy from Concordia University. Now, prior to homeschooling her 4 children, she taught special education in public schools in California and Missouri. When Heather noticed her local district allowed significant gaps in her daughter's instruction, her family made the decision to move to home education. Heather was intrigued by the classical Christian education model, which has proven to be a prosperous decision for her family. Heather's participated in training through the Consortium for Classical Lutheran Education, also through the Circe Institute, and through ClassicalU to further her appreciation and understanding of the classical Christian model. With 20 years of teaching experience in a variety of settings, she's adept in delivering strategies for individual student achievement. Heather's eager to share her expertise through providing direct services to students and consulting with schools and through conference presentations, as she just gave a day or two ago. Heather lives in Lansing, Michigan with her husband and their 4 children. They enjoy sporting Spartan athletics at Michigan State University, also exploring the arts and the beautiful state of Michigan. So, Heather, welcome. We're so glad you're joining us here from your hotel room there at the conference. Tell us what made you personally interested in the subject of learning differences.
So my brother, who's just 2 years younger than me, was diagnosed with ADHD when he was 5. So this has been a part of my life pretty much my entire life. And so I watched him grow up and struggle and my mom struggle and seeing the difference between what I knew he could do and what was happening at school. So he's the reason for my passion for students with learning differences, because I just wishing I had the words then that I have now. I just would want him to know that he's just fearfully and wonderfully made. And that's what I want for all of the students to know, that they are fearfully and wonderfully made. And there is a way for everybody to learn. And even if it takes a different path, they can still achieve. So that is my mission.
Amen. I'm sure that multiple participants on this call right now would be feeling the lump in their throat and resonating, because all of us in some way, shape, or form have been touched and experienced either in our immediate family or extended family or friends by those that manifest differences in the way they process, the way they learn, the way they move. And we ourselves find ourselves hungry for ways to affirm and to celebrate and to serve and to help. So that's what this evening is about. So thank you again, panelists, for joining us. And I'm going to start by tossing questions your way. I'll target either all of you or an individual that I'll toss a question to, and you'll respond to that. And then feel free, if as a panelist you want to, respond to what a fellow panelist says, absolutely, you're welcome. This is open dialogue, and we'll just spend the next 20 minutes or so in that format. And then we will definitely take questions from our participants. For starters, this is for all 3 of you. You can just take it in turn, but I want to ask the question, what myths would you like to dispel? Maybe it's something that you hear frequently, or it's just kind of in the air or in the water, but it's a myth surrounding learning differences that you would like to dispel. Shall I go to you first, Dr. Richards?
Sure. When I was pondering this question, and there's several, but I'll stick to 2. And the first one is I think maybe the obvious one for this evening. It's that classical education is only for the kind of most obviously academically gifted students. And I think this is just a fundamental misunderstanding of what classical education is about. But it's a common one, and I hear it a lot. And so to dispel the myth that this kind of beautiful, holistic education that has roots in the true, the good, the beautiful, and the holy is only for some subset of students, is kind of the first thing I think we need to get off the table. If we believe what we say about classical education and its goal of truth, beauty, and goodness, then it has to be for everyone. And we need to figure out how to make that possible. So that's the first one that I wanted to dispel, and I'd love to kind of talk about how we might go about dispelling that further. And the second one is related, and it's that disability is best understood as a problem in need of a solution. Right? Almost all of our models of disability are that disability is a problem and we need to figure out how to fix it. And I think this is just such a limiting understanding of the whole huge range of conditions that we call disability. And so I like to talk about disability not as a problem in need of solution, but as a part of a strange vocation, as part of the wholeness of human persons that God has placed with us for a reason. And that we need to explore the uniqueness and beauty of each person's vocation, and that classical education is a way that we can do that together. So those are the two big ones that I think I come back to again and again.
Heather, I'm going to toss it to you next because I'm guessing she hit on something you want to spring off of.
So one of the things that I've heard repeatedly from instructors at this conference is that they just want everybody to know that students with disabilities are not lazy. This is not about laziness. And I think with like some people less familiar with learning disabilities and neurodevelopmental disorders, that it's this misunderstanding that it's a choice to not be able to do something, where it's really not a choice, you know. And in my presentation earlier this week, you know, I said that, you know, some of these learning strategies, such as, you know, reading text or listening to a lengthy presentation without visual cues, these skills simply don't exist. You know, they're underdeveloped, undeveloped, or absent for our students with learning disabilities, which means that they need a different avenue. So this is not about laziness, right? And they often desire so desperately to achieve, you know, because they know how smart they are, right? So and often they're working harder than anybody else in the room because they have to mask, you know, because they know that they're not achieving in the same way that their peers are. And they have to compensate for how they're receiving information in a way that they can understand it. That would be mine.
That could deserve a whole panel, just, but thank you. Angelique, what does this bring up for you? What myth do you want to dispel?
So I know this will probably look different in homes versus schools, but what I have seen over the last 20 plus years is typically, and this goes back to what Heather said too, dads typically say they just need to work harder. They just need to work harder. They can get through this. And moms typically say, this is my fault. I've done something wrong. Neither is true. If you have red flags going up in your spirit, there's probably, even if it seems, you know, insignificant, that's probably something that we need to look into and address. And the good news is there is a lot we can do. And yes, we just need to be there to support them. And we're here to support all of you, families and schools, as you walk this journey with these kiddos.
Well, Angelique, thank you. That's a perfect segue to the next question that I wanted to toss to you specifically. We know that this is a long life that we're talking about. We're talking about a long road in all of our lives, a journey. But there are some things that sometimes you can get sort of an immediate way of addressing. And so my question for you is there anything that you think an action that somebody could take immediately, maybe not for immediate change, but it could be an immediate action that you have found to be supportive and helpful?
I have notes. I have 3 points I wanted to make sure I covered with this. So the first thing is to wherever the difficulty is showing up, remember what the point of that educational piece is. Are you trying to learn? Are you trying to lead these students in learning something about a particular point in history? Well, if it's the copying the history sentence that is bringing that difficulty to light, because remember, all students have areas of strength and areas of weakness. And depending on the environment, the activities we're asking them to participate in, and the way we're asking them to participate, it's going to highlight strengths and differences for each student. So, what is the real point of that particular education piece that you're trying to get across? And if there's something that is not really necessary, let it go. So, number two, we need to lower anxiety. So, everybody's got anxiety. The kiddo has anxiety, and you can see these things very literally. You'll see their cheeks get red, their ears may get red, their breathing and heart rate will go up, their pupils may even dilate. And that's when you need to say, okay, we got to dial this back. And if you're in a position where you can whip out a book and switch to some read aloud, great. But we need to lower anxiety for the instructors, whether that's in the school or if that's mom at home, and we need to lower anxiety for the kiddos. So being able to identify exactly what it is that's causing the anxiety and work around that, that's something that we can help you with. Then the biggest that will help everyone is movement. We need to increase movement, and this is something Dr. Richards talks about. We don't need to ask them to do more and say no, you can't go to recess or things like that. These kids need movement. All kids need movement way more than our modern students are getting. But especially the kids who struggle, they need movement to be able to regulate. Um, if you have a student or if you have a particular uh, subject during the day that seems to be the hardest, you really should be doing PE right before that subject. And this PE needs to look like pressure into the joints. We call it proprioception. So carrying heavy things and the vestibular sense and the inner ear as well. It could be push-ups. It could be pull-ups. It could be laying on their back and reading something above them. There's all kinds of things that can be done. Classical PE, which we call it now, is a whole component that used to be a normal part of the educational process when classical education was just education. And that's what we need to bring back into our schools and into our homes. It's coordinating for the nervous system. When you coordinate what's happening in the body, you automatically coordinate the brain. So just to recap, remember what the real point is of what that educational piece is you're trying to get across to that child. Let everything else unnecessary go. Figure out the anxiety point. What is causing you anxiety? What is causing that student anxiety? We can help you work around that and then increase movement.
Well, in light of these very practical and instant tips, this is a great place to invite you, Dr. Richards, now to speak to why. Why are we bothering? Why would we take these actions? You sort of indicated this initially, but give us a little view from in terms of the long game. What do you see as taking some long-term attention and why in the subject of learning differences?
Thank you. So I think I love all of this focus on the physical, right? If I focus the final assignment for my class is to design a classroom. Let's focus on our physical environment. Let's focus on our daily practices, our routine. We tend to think of, oh, I need to talk about the curriculum. I need to just figure out if I get the right curriculum, everything will line up. But it really has so much to do with how we see the person in their whole space and how it coordinates with home, if you're in the home or in a classroom setting. And I think a lot of the long-term pieces have to start with small things now. And the shift that I would love to see everybody make is let's start talking about this. I tell my students, I want you to be the person who is annoying everyone at every faculty meeting by saying, how will this affect our students with disabilities and learning differences? If we make this shift, if we go this way, if we use this curriculum, right? It needs to be part of every conversation that we're having to kind of set this long-term habit, develop this long-term virtue of attention, and really what I call telic attention, right? Which is a fancy term that just means attention to each individual student in light of his or her telos and purpose as a human person, right? And this really goes back to what Angelique was saying about what's the purpose of this particular activity, and extends it to kind of a much broader level, right? What are we doing here as educators broadly? And then how does this specific piece fit into it? And so we need two lenses, right? We need the distance lens and then we need the near lens. And practicing that habit of looking through those kind of bifocals, right, of the distance lens. What's our final telos? What's our big aim? And how can I serve this particular student in the place they're in right now, right? And this gets to maybe they just need to do some push-ups for a minute, or take a breath or get a drink of water, right? Making the space for that in our classrooms. My friend Sarah Kolinsky, who's a special educator and runs her own school now, gave me this fabulous phrase for this: the stressed brain cannot learn. Right? There's just so much evidence for this. And so lowering that stress through universal design, which I'm happy to talk about later, but the longer term piece is going to be designing an entire school environment that anticipates difference instead of treating it as a problem that we need to solve, that's kind of a present emergency, right? It's going to be there. So we shouldn't be surprised when it comes. We should be prepared with a posture of welcome. But that takes time to develop and to build programs and systems and all of these kinds of pieces that are much longer term pieces. But it starts with that kind of heart shift, and you'll start to see the fruit of those small tweaks, which I hope will give you kind of a real taste of what's possible when we start to make these shifts.
God bless you for that segue. You're basically speaking to like hospitality, like being mindful of being hospitable. And I can imagine that those who have personal connections and personal needs with students with learning differences, they're all on board. And those who don't have personal connections may be, not unkindly, but may be hesitant to feel like, why do I have to go to all this trouble? And so my question for you, Heather, is how is a difference a strength? What can you tell us?
Okay, so I was very excited to grab this question because these are what I call superpowers for kids who have learning differences. And it really is all about, doing that telic attention and paying attention to the person. What are they good at? What can they do? And the thing with disabilities is that there is a variety, not they're not they're not little copies of each other, not ADD does not look the same in every single kid, but there are some overall characteristics. And one thing that, we see time and time again with kids who have disabilities overall is that they're very empathetic. They're, they have some great ingenuity. They have a lot of courage. They're creative. Um, and kids with ADHD especially have this really amazing social intelligence and empathy. So these are some like really special creative kids. If you need somebody to think outside the box, you go grab that kid who has a learning difference and you will be amazed at what they can do. We have kids on the autism spectrum. They're the most honest people you will ever meet, often painfully so, but they are so very honest and they're disciplined and they have a crazy memory. I spoke to a mom today whose son is on the spectrum, and she says he's honest and reliable. If he says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. And that's very true. And then when we get into like dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia, kids with dyslexia, it's a reading disorder, but they have such a strong narrative reasoning. My daughter who has dyslexia, that kid remembers every single thing she hears. It's amazing. And then the kids with dysgraphia, which is a writing disorder, they're the best storytellers. because it's all like this oral storytelling and it can be beautiful. Um, and then as far as dyscalculia, which is the disability with math, they have to have developed problem solving skills. If numbers don't make sense to you and you're trying to add, you're going to get really creative to try to figure that out. And so that's what I really love about students who have learning disabilities is they have these hidden talents and these superpowers. And when you are blessed to find them, wow, like that's when you can really, really help those kids soar.
Thank you so much. To create accommodating classrooms is to invite a stronger classroom. You're inviting all these additional revelations of strength. But it's not without its complications as well. It's not without its difficulties. And on one hand, we want what we offer to be applicable in a home learning environment to home educators, but we're also mindful of those who are educators in schools, brick and mortar schools, and so forth, that it can be an additional layer of complication to accommodate a variety of needs in a single classroom. So I want to pitch this to all of you, whoever has a thought or a recommendation or anything in response to what can we tell our educators who are asking, how is accommodation possible in a classroom full of students? I'll take whoever wants to speak first.
The way that I found most helpful to think about it is a combination of universal principles of universal design that anticipate difference, in the way that I was talking about before, and attention to particularity, right? So I think the first thing to do is to say we're going to have differences. What kinds of differences can I anticipate? How can I set up my day? As Angelique was saying, right, it's not good for any kid to just sit for 30 minutes or 40 minutes at a time, especially when they're little guys. And so the ADHD kid just can't do it. It's not laziness, it's not it's not kind of a vice of any kind, like they just physically can't do it. But it's not good for any of the students, right? So what starts out as attention to a student with a disability or learning difference, when we orient our classroom around that into a more universal design, it will end up blessing all of our students. And so that's kind of step one is kind of how do we design our environment to anticipate these differences? So just offer your lesson in multiple modalities as part of the lesson planning instead of saying, okay, well, I had kind of written lesson, but now I have to do this oral thing for this other kid, right? Plan to have those options built into every lesson plan. And once you get in that habit, it's no longer, oh, I got to accommodate this and this and this. It's just built in to the way that we are thinking about our students and our culture in our classrooms. But then there are those things that really are going to be particular to particular kids. They're going to be fewer now that if you were practicing universal design. But in that sense, kind of balancing, trying to create this welcoming environment with this kind of loving of the individual kid, and setting up systems for that. So I'm a big advocate of setting up systems so that we know how to track and help these students, not as an end in itself, which I think it can often turn into in certain kinds of school systems of kind of measuring for the sake of measuring, but finding out what works for that kid and not making each new teacher figure that out for themselves, right? How do we create a whole school system that sees and knows the kids in collaboration with parents? So those are kind of some structural pieces, and I'd love to hear the kind of more specifics that Angelique and Heather bring to that framework.
I'll jump in. So I also teach at my kids' homeschool community 1 day a week. And a couple of years ago, I was given a class of all boys. And I knew, so they were fourth grade, all boys, only eight, but anybody's ever had a class of very wiggly, all boys. And we didn't have a classroom. Our classroom was the church sanctuary. So there were no like boundaries. The kids need that. And I prayed all summer, what am I going to do? And I knew there was one or two kiddos in there who really had some struggles, movement. So I changed our day around, and we start when we're supposed to be starting with memory work, we start with some PE. We take 10 minutes and we do some different exercises, and we have no behavior issues for the entire morning. The kids are more attentive, they're kinder to each other. And then what I'm hearing from the families is they're going home and insisting they do this stuff at home. And I put something together that incorporates some neurological things and some aspects of classical PE. Um, Something else that's a hallmark of kids who have trouble remembering something, and this is for anyone, especially those of us who came out of the modern education movement, like all of us that grew up in public school system, there's just not enough review. So I think it's Josh Gibbs' book, Something They Will Remember, is amazing, amazing. Start every class with practicing your memory work together. So like for my reading foundations classes in Scholé lower school, we start every reading class with the whole class together recites our phonograms, and we add new phonograms every week, and we just add it to our stack, and we go through and we recite them. And over time, your students who can't just look at a book and get it out of the book, hearing it, seeing it, and practicing things at a high repetition and to a rhythm are some of the best ways to build new neural pathways. So if you're already building that into your class time where you're moving together and you're doing this catechetical style review in every class, and maybe, breaking it up throughout the school day, just those two things are going to meet so many more needs for students that you may not have even been aware of. Kids who were masking it and you didn't know they were struggling, this is going to take some of that anxiety down for them and make it easy for the instructor.
So, kind of piggyback on universal design. I think what that looks like in a classroom is just acknowledging that we all have preferences in our learning environment. Some people prefer to work in quiet. Some people prefer to work with white noise, and just kind of normalizing and the differences that we all have, as unique children of God. And God created us all different that way. And so when you have students with learning differences who desperately need those options, they're not they're not singled out, because everybody's acknowledging that, wow, it's a lot easier for me to think when maybe the lights are dim versus very bright, or I use pink paper as a line marker instead of black because the contrast is too much. So, just having these options available, and that definitely that multimodal teaching approach, which, I know those of us in this kind of came up at our conference here this week, was that yes, that tends to be a progressive, buzzword, is like that multimodal teaching approach. But when you're talking about students with learning disabilities, and one of their modes is not functioning correctly, then well, they need to rely on the other ones. And so, as instructors, we need to recognize that in our students because we love them, right? And we want them to do well, and we want them to hear what is true, good, beautiful, and holy. And however we need to get that to them is how we do that. And lowering anxiety in the classroom and having this universal design where they are welcomed in and like valued and part of the community, where everybody has the option to listen to an audiobook when it's appropriate. Everybody has the option to, go grab the math manipulatives, even if you're in a high school classroom. That's fine. Have a box of fidgets that are really quiet, that they can just like grab, and it's okay. So just building that into the culture of your classroom is just going to help everybody, but it's a lifeline for those students with learning disabilities.
And just to kind of add one thing there, I think that we can, as classical educators, be kind of almost allergic to anything that sounds like something that progressive educators are doing right now. And I think two things there. One is, you know, sometimes we need to listen to wherever the truth is coming from, right? So if they have caught on to something that's actually helping students, we need to be able to say that looks good, but we're going to now integrate it into our classical approach. But another piece, and I think Angelique was pointing to this, is reclaiming the breadth of our classical roots, right? It's not just about the trivium and the quadrivium, right? It's about music and gymnastic, right? Kevin Clark and Ravi Jain and the liberal arts tradition really focus on kind of piety, music, and gymnastic as the root of the classical tradition in a lot of ways, and reclaiming those pieces of it that can really help all students, but especially students with different kinds of learning needs. I think can really illuminate how this fits into a classical picture in particular.
Yes. It seems that that also, with our participants, that's really struck a nerve because all of you have agreed like movement is key, movement is critical, movement is needed. And I know that in schools and even in our homes, sometimes we can feel like we're educating well by the information dump or the stillness, but we're all saying movement. So I invite you panelists to, if there's anything else that you want to be sure that we get to, feel free to, set the next topic of a conversation, but I'm just going to kind of gently transition to some questions that have come in relation to what's already been said. And some of them first directed at some things that Angelique said, but kind of you were all attesting to, was in relation to the neurological connections. We've had a panelist, a participant say, is there an age where the increased movement or these exercises are less effective with students? This particular participant works with high school students in a classical private school. So they're just wondering some feedback from you on ages that benefit the most potentially. And then I would invite you, Angelique, any concrete ideas. I think what you already said was so great, and I'm sure people would eat it up more, like holding the book like this. Well, can they lay out in their classrooms? But what are some actual concrete things, and what does it do neurologically? How does it help?
This could be a whole a whole webinar. So definitely by the time they get to middle school and high school, they're going to be less enthusiastic about taking the brain breaks and doing the movement. That's where if you are just building PE into your day and it's not a question, that this is just a normal part of the school day. So classically, it was. There's some really fantastic Library of Congress videos from the early 1900s that show what all the teachers were doing in the classroom. They were playing the piano because teachers did that. They played the piano, and there was a piano in every classroom. And the students were doing these neurological activities. When I look at it through that lens, I'm like, oh, that's amazing. Like an occupational therapist might put something like that together. Um, I hope I get all of the things. You may have to refresh me on the questions. So for the older students, it's just going to have to be something that you build in. Then we're going to get like, oh, I'm in a dress and I don't want to mess up my hair and stuff like that. But there are, you can go to Pinterest, look up vestibular activities and proprioceptive activities, and you can put age groups in there, and you can find things that are going to be better for different ages. There is a documentary called The Motivation Factor. You can find it on Amazon and different places, but it specifically looks at classical PE. And it was still in some schools into, I believe, the 1970s, and the types of things that they did. And those are some things that you can build back into your school day, whether it's a homeschool or a brick and mortar school. I know there was more. What did I miss?
Oh, that's great, because that was another
Yeah.
part of the follow-up question is, do you have any further recommendations for ways to explore these ideas and
Mhm.
resources? So
So
that's very
there's two these books are older, so you'll have to go to like thrift books and aid books and stuff, but there was an author, Bonnie Pruden. She was classically trained, and when it went away, she saw what was happening and was actually on like the first presidential fitness council. And she has several books where she was trying to bring it back. And so like I have several of her books that were published in the like 40s, 50s, and 60s. Um, There's Ron Jones, was a PE guy in California who realized all of this, and he actually went back through like private collections and digitized materials from the 1800s. And he has a YouTube channel called The Lean Berets, and he has some exercises that you can do specifically in your classrooms on there. So there's a couple of quick resources for you.
That's so cute, the lean berets. I'm going to pass one to you, Dr. Richards, to um, kind of twofold, or I see them similarly. Um, how do you filter popularly practiced approaches to learning differences through the lens of a thoughtfully classical approach? And similarly, how do you strike a balance between providing these needed accommodations and also the needed rigor or challenge?
Yeah, so I'll try to speak to those in turn and probably a little bit together. The first piece of figuring out how to integrate is, I think, being really solid on this kind of telic attention, right? This vision towards the whole, right? And so if you are aiming towards the true, the good, the beautiful, and the holy, almost always you'll find, okay, this is a really helpful piece or practice or kind of way of conceiving things, right? But it's not sufficient. It's not going to be integrated into that picture of the whole human person, right? And so if it's effective, why is it effective? And how is it speaking to an aspect of the whole person that we were missing? And that's going to help you to integrate that piece to avoid it becoming an end in itself, right? Or it might say, when you look at it through that lens, you say, oh, it was effective in getting the behavior I wanted, but it's actually a form of not treating that student as a whole human person, right? I think, and in that way, I think that this kind of telic attention, this attention to the whole, to the end, to the purpose of education and of our human life, right? And of education in our human life can kind of serve as a litmus test for how we adopt or maybe sometimes resist certain kinds of practices when we're trying to integrate them into a classical curriculum. But to kind of get over that, it doesn't look like I thought it looked, or it's coming from a source that I don't like. Let's be more thoughtful than that. Let's not reject something that really might be helpful because we have maybe even legitimate doubts and concerns about the source. In terms of rigor, this is a word I talk about in the book, and I totally stole it from Christopher Perrin through a long chain of people. I said, "Oh, I got it from I forget where it came from somebody," and it led back. That's actually Chris Perrin's term, so that's very funny that it originated with Cap. Rigor versus vigor, right? So the word rigor was forever ruined for me when I realized that it was the same root as rigor mortis, right? So rigor is when we are stiff, and the origin of the term is kind of stiff and dead. I just want to get this body and it's set, and I want exactly what it is when I need it. What we're looking for is challenge. The real world and the beauty of creation and all of these kinds of things we do are challenging and enriching, and they're hard, right? But we want to approach them not with rigor that's kind of towards a set or controlled end, but with vigor, with a liveliness that feeds our life and feeds into the life of the world, the life of the church, the life of the people, and the deep richness of living things themselves. We're talking about scientific curriculum in particular, getting into the kind of quadrivium subjects. And so the question about rigor, I think, really needs to become a question about truth and reality and the best ways to enter into that. And I do think that we need to pay particular attention to students who might be what we would typically call gifted, right? So when we're talking about learning differences, being gifted is also a learning difference. And we need to think about ways in which we allow students to kind of fly, who need to fly, while we support the students who are struggling with various things. And as Heather was saying earlier, figure out where they fly that we might be missing because we were focused on rigor in a particular narrow way, right? I was fascinated by the statistic that 5%, I think, of the population has dyslexia, and people with dyslexia or some kind of specific learning disability make up 40% of the Rhode Island School of Design. Right? Talk about kind of giftedness that we need to be paying more attention to. And so that's a kind of high level response. And I would, I always I'm trying to think kind of how does that come down, but into kind of actual practices on the ground. But that's the framework, I think, is Vigor instead of Rigor, and how do we feed all of our students into their lives?
Thank you. I love that. High five to the Dr. Perrin quote, and so true about what is our own telos and our aim toward truth, not toward some kind of accolades. We're trying to love as the Lord loves, serve as He serves. So, um, I think that what might be helpful now, because we're still having a number of questions come in, and some of them are very practical in terms of specific issues related to specific students. And I don't think there's any way we could get to all of them or cover it. But I do think it maybe has some merit to throw some things out there to hear some responses, because I hope that everyone will benefit from some of your thoughts and processes in relation to these kind of case studies, maybe we'll call them. Okay. So I'll just read a couple that have come in, and then can seek your advice from there. Okay. My son has ADHD 2E. He loves to doodle in classes or on homework. I keep telling him he can doodle, but it needs to be about what he's learning. I've had him take doodle note-taking classes on OutSchool, but all he wants to do is draw tanks. I got you. Mom boys unite. How do I get him to use his favorite neuromodulation to help him remember what he's learning? All right, that's question one. Come on, Heather.
All right.
Burning in you.
So I guess my first question would be that when he's doodling tanks, if he's hearing information and he's doodling tanks while he's hearing the information, is he able to answer like those comprehension questions? And if he is, that means the tanks are working. And that's a fidget.
So probe a little further. Okay, so let's explore just a little bit more. Like, what if it 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 seems to indicate it's not a fidget, but we don't know that maybe there's not the retention there that they want to see. Anything from there to explore about how to guide the drawing and the doodling, or no?
If he's really, really into drawing tanks, then doodling might not be the right study tool. That could be the brain break, So in that case, then we would need to look at, just ask more questions such as, does he, like if you give him like 3 things to do, like brush your teeth, wash your hands, and put your clothes in the hamper, that kind of stuff. How many of those things is he able to remember, at a time? And if he's able to remember a number of them, then he's probably a strong auditory learner. And then we lean on that for how he learns and less on taking notes. Conversely, if he's more visual, then maybe going to symbols instead of full drawings, because if I have a son as well, and he definitely has his series of interests. A lot of Mario for a while there. So the tanks are probably distracting, but maybe like a 3D question mark is not distracting if we're talking about annotating. Using like different colored I prefer colored pencils, I think, when we're underlining, because they're less messy and you can erase some of them. Like underlining in the text. So it's just, I would definitely move away from drawing, because that seems to be a hyper focus from what I'm understanding. That would be my best guess, is that he's hyper focusing on doodling tanks and it might be an escape, which means he's escaping from something. What is he escaping from? And what is causing him the anxiety? And is he learning in the way that he needs to learn? And so then you just kind of start there and start backtracking. Like, why is he hyper focusing? Like, what's the reason behind that? Okay, then let's deal with that. And so
Thank you so much, Heather, because that kind of illustrates our special needs instructors' means of working to get to the root. And it's not an instant revelation, but there are exploratory ways to uncover, to discover, and then to prescribe. Following that, let's try one more. And then, and I welcome anybody to chime in, but this is, I have a older student, a rising junior, and he has dysgraphia and expressive language disorder because of autism. He's a voracious reader, but he has great difficulty in expressing his ideas on paper or verbally. I use Diane Craft's method of outlining by asking him leading questions, writing down keywords, and having him write from that. But I need more ideas on how to help him express his ideas, say what he likes, what interests him. This would be so helpful, not only for doing school, but also figuring out what he wants to do once he finishes school. And before anybody chimes into that, let me just say, parents, you're doing fabulously. I mean, just the thoughtfulness of what you're looking at and what you're asking and how you're helping. You are just who that child needs. Okay. Side note. Now, ladies, any thoughts for this parent?
So I would continue the questioning that Heather started as well. What does work for him? Is there some other way? Can he draw a picture? Can he talk about it at all, even if it's in bits and pieces? And then maybe using dictation, the dictation function, and then helping him get that into coherent sentences. You know, maybe he can paint something. There's a lot of other ways to communicate versus just writing. And like Dr. Richards pointed out, the significant portion of students, I don't remember which school it was, but the more art focused students, there may be some other way that the point of that educational assignment can be met without it having to be this 5-sentence paragraph type thing, if that makes sense. I know that one's a really difficult one, and I would want to meet the student personally and ask more questions because there's a lot of different directions that you can go with it, and it needs to be really individualized. But play on their strengths.
Beautiful. So, question maybe for Dr. Richards and for any other ladies that you have experience here, but this is when I teach at a 2-day classical hybrid homeschool. My son with ADHD and dyslexia is also enrolled. He only gets 25 minutes of recess a day, which includes lining up and walking a long way to the gym. How can I convince the school that they need to add more physical breaks, not just for him, but for many other kiddos at the school? So, any tips for working on administration or otherwise, Dr. Richards?
Make the administrators watch the webinar. Right. I really, and I say that only kind of half tongue in cheek. I've had, I've seen this from both directions, right? Both kind of heads of school really wanting to convince their faculty to be open to new ideas, and vice versa, right? Faculty, and sometimes just having an outside person say it instead of you, who is already in this dynamic, can be really helpful, right? To say, hey, can I send you this? So instead of, why don't we do this, right? That's combative from the start, right? Say, hey, I learned this. Can we watch this? Can we read this together as a faculty? I would really like to talk about how we can integrate more time for recess, more time for free play into their day. And here's the research that backs me up. So, not my kiddo needs this and you have to do it for him. But listen to these outside voices. Can we have a conversation together, getting this collaboration? And I think that the kind of hybrid homeschool environment that's already in the habit of collaborating with parents, hopefully, is a perfect place to do that. You might also talk to the teachers to say, okay, well, maybe we really are. It's just these 25 minutes and that's all we can do. Can we make a sensory hallway in the hallway that they used to get there? So that all the way on that long walk, we are not just marching in line. That's just one more structured, rigid activity, but we're going down a sensory hallway where we push against the wall. And we, there's various ways to even make a walk down the hallway more engaged. But also, can each class build in 2 or 3 minutes even, right? Start small. Of these kinds of physical activities such that that's not the only time they're moving their bodies during the day. So that's kind of a variety of strategies, but I would definitely say start with an invitation to conversation, and explain where that goes, or kind of explain where your concern is coming from outside of, I'm really upset because this is hurting my kid, and it's so hard to start anywhere but there. I'm a mom too, I get that. But talking about and understanding yourself even how this is good for human beings, not just for your kid.
So wise to use that external voice. Okay, Angelique, you have another thought about that?
If administration is not ready to have this conversation yet while you're working on them and praying for them, maybe the classroom teacher is. And the rubber bands around the legs of the chairs, having balance boards and balance cushions in the classrooms. If kiddo needs to get up and go stand on a balance board and even work on a clipboard, that's physical movement. And anytime you ask the body for balance, so whether it's a balance cushion in the seat that they're sitting on, I skew away from the balls, because then we start bouncing and we go off in one direction. But the cushions that go in the seat or standing on a balance board, anytime you request balance, a chemical wash goes over the brain and increases focus and attention. So if you've got a handful, if your your child's classroom teacher is willing to have, and maybe you donate them some 2 or 3 balance boards. I have them in my homeschool community classroom where I've got 3 or 4 and everybody takes turns. And so then we're practicing being kind to each other and taking turns as well, and recognizing when our bodies are saying, I need this. And so there's ways to do it that aren't even jumping around.
Related question. What about things that seem to help and assist some, but actually distract others? Like fidgets, maybe. Any thoughts on that?
I actually talked about this week. So there are, like, if we're talking about fidgets, for instance, there are so many options, like an overwhelming amount of options. And there are some fidgets that are really amazing that fit. There's lots of lists of fidgets that meet a certain sensory need. And some of those fidgets are really great for individual study, like at home, and some of them are more suited for the classroom. So I think because there are such a variety, for instance, if somebody needs like that pressure, well, in a classroom, a kneadable eraser, it's a great option because it's also useful. You can erase it and it's easily hidden, as opposed to a big stress ball, that will likely fall out of their little hands, end up across the room, be like, hey, I want that toy to play with too. So there are lots of options. So I would say, okay, I just saw in the comments, if you go to therapyshop.com, it's spelled with like 2 P's and an E, Therapy Shop. They have it really well organized. And so you can go through all of that. So that is what I would say, is that there are so many options out there. Look at what is the student getting from this fidget? What are they looking for? What kind of sensory input are they wanting? And find one that's appropriate for the setting.
I would
So
say headphones too. Like if it's a noise thing, you can have sound canceling headphones, but if then you have the kids who need classical music or white noise, they can have their headphones plugged into an MP3 player or something like that, where they are getting something different. And when everybody starts recognizing in an earlier age what they need and what works for them, the whole community is going to be healthier. So just providing those options and talking about how it's normal for different people to need different things is really wonderful.
So this is a question uh, that ask for the other side of things, how to incorporate more of the classical education into a traditional like SPED classroom or serving a student with an IEP. The specific question is, how do you incorporate classical ed in the resource room? Like from a SPED teacher perspective, where you need to follow an IEP. And I think we've kind of spoken to that or addressed that, but looking at it from that other angle, does anybody have some thoughts on that?
I think the IEP system is really tough. And I think just acknowledging that up front. This system was not designed um, with classical education kind of understanding of the world in mind. It was designed from a very different standpoint. But I think for schools, and I know this is, I've talked a lot with teachers and administrators in classical charter schools that are bound by this kind of IEP law, and they have to follow it, about making sure that the IEP is a tool, not a telos, right? In your own conception, right? So I think that's the first kind of mental shift, right? This is a tool, not the telos, because it's so easy to get wrapped up. I've got to meet the goal on this date. Well, you do for legal purposes, right? But it can keep you from seeing the kid in front of you. In terms of the classical pieces in particular, I'm trying to remember exactly what it's called in the IEP, but using the kinds of classical tools as the method that you're using to meet the goal, right? And so if the accommodation is kind of break things down into further parts, well, the theory of rhetoric, for instance, has beautiful ways of understanding the whole of a literary text in smaller parts, right? So it's actually really amazing. The classical tool is amazing for students with disabilities and learning differences, because instead of write a better essay, we can talk about all of these tools of rhetoric, right? And so finding ways in which the need to say, scaffold an assignment, right, can be tied really deeply in with the existing kind of classical understanding of the subject. So I think looking for those resonances, and then also saying, where do we just have to say, well, this is what the IEP requires. We have to kind of get through that without losing our understanding of the telos. So use it as a tool. And sometimes it's going to be a tool that just kind of has to be met in order to continue serving that student. Is kind of a first thought, but I would be fascinated to hear kind of what others think about kind of managing that tension.
Yeah. It's beautiful. I'm mindful of our time, and we have roughly 15 minutes remaining, but I know that that can go quickly. And as I said, there was no way to get to all of the questions, but I hope that topically we've touched on many of them. So what I wanted to do in our last bit of time is, in a sense, shameless plugs, but not, but hearing from each one of you ladies individually, because I'm sure that there are people who've heard from you and they're like, I want to know more, or where can I get more or connect better? Or so I would like to invite you to speak to, concrete services that you offer or are part of what you offer in a group, and then also opportunities to learn with you, to read from you, things like this. And then also it be an opportunity for you to say any final thoughts that you may want to share that have, kind of occurred to you, that have welled up in you, that you're like, I just want to make sure families know this or emphasize this. Okay. So, if I may, I'll just start with you, Dr. Richards, to say, what would you like families to know, and what can you be sure they're aware of that you offer or your friends offer, and so on, that they can follow up with?
I want families to know that they're not alone, right? I think sometimes we can feel so isolated with our student and feel like we're in a community that's not supportive or that won't understand. There are, and as you can tell by the number of people on this webinar, there are other people out there, right? And so I just want my work to be a form of facilitating that community, but also to hear that your desire to offer this beautiful education to your children is the best starting point, right? And your love for your children, whether those be your students in your classroom or your own kids, um, is really the beginning of this kind of telic attention. And I just want to honor that and thank my fellow panelists and you, Joylynn, for all of the different ways in which you serve those people. In terms of learning with me, so the ClassicalU course is obviously a really great place to start. That's kind of a really condensed version of my graduate class on this topic. And then my forthcoming book, which will be out soon. You can pre-order it now, which is very exciting because this has been a labor of love for many years for me. So I'm very excited that it's coming out, called Disability and Classical Education with ClassicalU, which is a new imprint of Classical Academic Press. And then if you are interested in learning more about classical education in general, including my class, and you are looking for a graduate level education, come join us at the Templeton Honors College in our Master of Arts in Classical Teaching program. We have a very flexible schedule that has a residential component that we'll always have, but it is limited. So you could do it in as little as 1 3-week session, one summer in the new format. And then everything else you can take online. So it can be finished, I think, in as little as 15 months, or you can take as long as you like to join us for that. So we'd love to see you in that program as well. I also can sometimes do speaking engagements depending on your location in the country. So if you're interested in that, please reach out.
Thank you so much. And back to that question of a third-party voice. Dr. Richards may be the ideal voice, either in her book or through her course, that you acquaint those in your community that you would like to raise their awareness of this topic. So don't hesitate to, buy a few copies for some friends. Uh, all right. Well, Angelique, how about you? Tell us how families can follow up with you and anything that you want to be sure families know.
Okay, so you can absolutely find me in the CSLD, the Center for Students with Learning Differences. You can request help. And then we start with a consultation and we go from there, and we can be creative and, what are your needs? And these are for the families. What are your needs? What are your students' needs? And how can we help you that way? I also teach corporate classes for the lower school in Scholé Academy, where I developed a reading program, Reading Foundations. It starts with littles, all the way up through third, fourth grade. We spend half the time with moms and kids, or parent and kiddos, and where I'm actually instructing them and modeling for you what you need to do the rest of the week at home. Then about halfway, a little over halfway through, kiddos are free to go, read a book, get a snack, whatever. And I get really in depth with the parents on, we start at the beginning of the school year with the learning environment, how to set up your learning environment. And then we walk through different um, types of processing and sensory issues, and how to see how your child is functioning in that particular area, and exercises that you can do at home to improve that functioning. And then we go all the way through. We even deal with primitive reflexes some. And then when we get into, depending on what level class it is, when we get to like the tricky things like spelling rules and stuff, then I'll really make sure that you are understanding how to do that. And there's exercises then that your child can do throughout the week. And then we come back together again for the next class, and we have our catechetical learning, where we're going through like our flashcards together. Can't really see those. It's just phonogram cards. We go through those together, talk about how we implemented what we learned last week at home during the week, and spend some time kind of building community. And then we add the next step, and we just keep going through there. And then are we going to talk about for schools? Should I let you do that?
Well, I mean, I can chime in here, and then sometimes we are aware that there may be schools who definitely want some kind of faculty training or assistance or even tips that can be shared. So through our tutoring center, there's a way that you can also request a consultant for your school to be paired with them. And that's not yet live on our website, but it will be within next week. So in the meanwhile, you can feel free to just reach out to Presbytera Maria, the manager of our tutoring center. But if you're interested in one of these lovely ladies, Angelique or Heather, to consult with your faculty, there are ways that we can arrange that either over Zoom or even depending on space, time, and distance and so forth, even some in-person possibilities. So that's that. Is there anything else that you wanted to share, Angelique, to be sure families know?
I just want to encourage everybody. So you may have like come here with these burning questions and felt like you didn't get the specific answers that you needed, but a door has been opened for you. And God knows exactly the direction that you need to go and what your student needs. And for the instructors in brick and mortar classes as well. Your heart, God sees that your heart is for these kids and these families, and it is going to be okay. And I feel like the whole classical world is just kind of shifting and turning. And I'm so excited about Dr. Richards' work that we're going to do this and we're going to do it together. There's resources for you. You are not alone, and we are here to help you and walk through this with you. And I promise there's other people struggling with the same things around you, and you're just not aware of it because we don't feel comfortable talking about these things. Sometimes there's shame involved, which there shouldn't be. This is just the human condition. We all have our things, and this is a great opportunity for us to share and struggle together and to build community together.
Thank you so much, Angelique. And Miss Heather, I think I even saw some people chime in the chat like, well, Miss McCoy has helped our child. And Heather, tell us what are some of the services that you offer, and then what do you want families to know?
So the services I offer are I don't do a core for course like Angelique, but I work with students one-on-one and their families. That's I'm serving the student, I partner with the families. We're in this together. Um, we come up with a specific program and strategy that works for that individual student using the materials that they already have in their courses. So we're not adding anything to their day. I'm using the homework and the schoolwork that they're already doing to develop their strategies, help them to reformat, chunk, see things in the way that they need to. And I tend to work with older students, the middle schoolers and high schoolers who are really reaching for that independence. And so that's really what my focus is for them, is to not just teach them the strategies, but to help them to love their brain, know their brain, say these are the things you do well, and this is how you could use those things to make these hard things a little bit easier. And look what you did. Now let's see how we can use that. We did this in math. All right, now let's look at composition. How are we going to apply these same lessons there? So that's just, I adore that. I love that. It's been super, super fun. Um, I'm also really, really excited to start reaching out to individual teachers and schools to kind of jump back in that pool. I do remember the frustration of being a public school teacher, and when I was a public school teacher, I had 20 students on my caseload at one point. I understand being overworked and overwhelmed and just in the weeds all year long. So if I think I saw somebody who had like 30 kids in her class with no aid, which is insanity. Um, I've been there. I get it. I'm empathetic. We're not living in there's no rose colored glasses here. We know it's hard. So I'm very excited to just, you know, be available to help in this new arena so that we can just help more kids access classical education and just realize that they are fearfully and wonderfully made, and they're all God's children and they are loved and valued.
I want to say a personal thank you to Dr. Richards for what you're doing, and to Angelique and Heather for all of your services. Each one of you are making real difference in real lives, and we are extremely grateful. Look, this
You're
is
doing great. You are. You're doing great. Keep going.
we love partnering with you, and we hope that this was a expression of that. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and do not hesitate to reach out if we can support you in any way. God bless you all. Good night.